Good afternoon. My name is Morgan Flum. I'm the CEO of Pivot Analysis, and today I'll be walking through a couple of workflows related to player analysis. So designed to understand really what's happening to your team if a player is leaving or what a player that you are trying to recruit would bring to your team. So using our tools as well as some of the other documents we put together, such as the Excel sheet with the percentiles and the cheat sheets. So let's get rolling. So I'm going to focus today on the transfer of Matt Harms from Purdue to BYU and go into a little bit of detail on the impact that he may have and what Purdue is losing and what BYU could be gaining. So a good way to start a lot of these analyses, and this is what the topic of the first webinar was, is on the player analysis side or on the team analysis side. So being able to understand how your team performed overall. So if you're using the app and you just want to quickly look up some numbers, using the cheat sheet that we have available on the site, or using our Excel sheet where we have the full stats per row per team. So understanding how your team performed overall in various categories is a good way to obviously understand how your how your strengths and weaknesses were in the last season and what may be affected for who's leaving and areas that you need to improve in. So looking in with Purdue and Matt Harms, we can start in at the on-off metrics. So this is a good place to start when you're doing the player analysis because it's going to give you a pretty good breakdown in terms of player by player, how they affected the team on the offensive and defensive side, and what the differences when they were on the bench versus on the floor. So it's the top of the rotation. It's going to be a little bit of noise sometimes. 400 possessions for Eric Hunter on the bench is a pretty small sample. But as we move down further, we end up having pretty even split in terms of on and off. And that's when you can start to make a little bit better analysis of the impact that that player is having on the floor in terms of offense and defense, and then have some areas to focus on in their next step. So looking at Matt Harms has some pretty drastic negative impact on offense. So 20 points per 100 swing, and almost no margin, almost no difference on defense. But this doesn't mean that there's not a difference in terms of that defensive profile, because it's important when viewing these numbers that these are outputs from the offensive or defensive profile on the floor. So this 99 can be generated by playing really good three-point defense and allowing shots at the rim, or vice versa, or getting every rebound, or forcing a lot of turnovers. So it's a good number. We know that overall it's a pretty solid defensive rating, so in about the 90th percentile, but the way that number is generated can vary significantly. So it's important that we know that, okay, there's no real change in terms of overall defensive efficiency when he's on or off, but we need to track, is that profile the same, or is his presence on the floor have some meaningful difference in certain categories. So using the lineup explorer is going to be the best way to do that. So this is going to give you the ability to drill in, on any player in any situation. So it's a really flexible tool, but we're going to use it right now to look at Matt Harms and understand when he's on the floor, what happens to Purdue, and using what we know about him as a player. So he's backup center, using the film that we have to validate the numbers, we can start to drill in a little bit and understand, okay, this is what's happening based on what I've seen. This is real, this isn't real, and we can have a little bit of an understanding regarding his impact. So we know his output, so the per 100 numbers, but we didn't get the 4 factors in the on-off, and so that's something that we want to look at a little bit. So on the EFG side, there's a slight dip, especially on the offensive side. -2 is obviously not optimal. We look at overall, we know that they're actually a net negative on average. So this is not a specialty for Purdue. They're already always struggling in that. But we know that on the offensive rebound side, they're normally plus 8.7. And with him on the floor, it's plus 2. And we want to look at when he's off the floor, we see some really big swings. So it goes positive on EFG, which is interesting, but it goes from 2 to 13 on the offensive rebound rate. So a huge drop off in terms of rebounding when he's on the floor, which is certainly a factor for the reduction in offensive rating. I mean, they have an offensive rebound rate of almost 40 when he's on the bench and 30 when he's on the floor. So the number of field goal attempts that they are able to put up when he's on the floor is significantly less than the number of field goal attempts when he's off. And they're slightly less efficient on those shots. So free throw rate and TOV, there's a pretty decent swing in free throw rate, not as much on TOV, but he's not having a large positive impact overall in a lot of these metrics. So we want to understand, is there a difference in terms of the shot profile and what's happening to the team in this category? So this is another area where the Excel sheet with the percentiles is going to be pretty useful, because it's going to give you an idea of how effective this team is in these categories. So here we can see that they're normally a very effective rebounding team, but that changes when Harms is on the floor. And then the shot profile data is here, and especially the at the rim data is going to be useful for evaluating a center. So we have their offensive production, so team percentage at the rim and team proportion, so the percentage of field goals attempted, as well as what they allow. So this is going to give you an idea as to the offense efficiency at the rim, so their post play in many ways, and their rim protection. So the rim protection is an area that they were pretty good in overall, and that BYU struggled in. So that could be an area where Matt Harms can provide value potentially. So going back to this data, when he's off the floor, opponents shoot almost 60% at the rim, and they take 45% of their shots there. But when he's on, that number drops to 50 and 36. So that explains why he's able to have a smaller, or basically no change in terms of the defensive rating when he's on the floor, because they're getting crushed on the boards, but they allow so many fewer shots at the rim and on such worse efficiency that it makes up for those differences. And so he may not be a super effective player in all parts of the game, but in terms of rim protection, which is an area that BYU has needs in, he is elite. These numbers are very, very good. And then we're also seeing a slight increase in percentage of shots from mid-range, which is another output of good rim protection, because if people are being deterred from taking those shots, they're taking the shots from mid-range. And this is a category where the traditional box score metrics have a really hard time capturing what rim protection is, because the absence of a shot being taken at the rim is never really captured anywhere but in this type of data. So being able to know, okay, we know the number of shots taken at the rim when he's on the floor, when he's off the floor, and the efficiency on those, you can see those splits, and you know that he is in large part responsible for the rim protection differences there. That's where you can start to add into the traditional film analysis or the box score with some of this data, because being able to look at it in aggregate over a full season provides a pretty clear picture in terms of what's happening defensively to this team. So this is a pretty good way of starting at the top, so with the offensive and defensive indicators, and then drilling in to understand what's actually happening to the team when this player is on the floor, and using our prior knowledge to determine, is this person responsible for that? Do they play a major role in this positive or negative swing? Another tool that we can use for analyzing a certain player leaving or coming is the combination explorer. So this is going to give us an idea as to which players play best or worst with another player type. So using this season of data, We calculated all of the two-player ratings, so all the two-player combos over a full season, and we're also measuring how much better or worse that is relative to their individual net ratings. So we would expect Matt and Aaron Wheeler to be on average +3, but they were +8. So there's a 5-point difference per 100 possessions based on their expected averages and their actual rating together. So something is causing this increase. So from BYU's perspective, they're going to play Harms 10 minutes a game, deployed really to protect the rim. How can they maximize that? Probably by having a strong rebounding power forward or something. So being able to use what we know about the profile of that player, plus this kind of data to add in, is a good way to ensure that you're able to maximize the value of a player. Additionally, if Purdue is looking to bring in another defensive focused center, maybe deploying them in certain scenarios with players that are complementary to them is a good way to reduce the negative impact that they might have had. So this tool obviously specifically is useful for understanding how your players perform together, but in the next level, you can have some idea regarding player type and who may play poorly or better with the player. And so when you're getting a transfer or you're trying to replace someone on your team, knowing, okay, when we had a guy that was like this guy before, the numbers were really good when he played with our ball heavy point guard. So being able to have that kind of data and at least have somewhere to start from in terms of an analytical perspective is pretty useful for starting to look at roster turnover year over year. So we could do something similar on the BYU side, start to analyze how a player could be integrated or what players are going to be taking off. But ultimately, it's the same process. It's starting at the top, starting to drill down a little bit, pick out some of the 4 factors or the shot profile data, determine if they have an impact in there, and then look at who plays well with them, who plays poorly with them, and starting to move forward with roster construction and getting some of the rotations put together. So using this, I mean, it's really a top-down method of how does the team perform in these situations? How do I actually generate those numbers? Do these players, which players are the ones responsible for those positive or negative swings? How can I maximize that? How can I replace that? It's really what we're trying to make easier here and ensure that you have the tools to get some pretty good fidelity on how your team performs in various situations and with various players. All right, thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care.